Hello and welcome to episode 410 of the Crate and Crowbar gaming podcast, being recorded on the 16th of November 2022. I'm Marsh Davis, and tonight I'm joined by Jamie Britton.
Hello.
Hello, Jamie. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad. How are you, Marsh?
Oh, super, thank you. I've been playing a game from the distant past, Jamie.
Oh, is it the ancient game of chess or backgammon, perhaps?
I have to say, I'm not quite cerebral enough to play chess in the way that Tom Senior does. There was really interesting arguments about the nature of chess recently, whether it is indeed a game at all online. I can't really recapitulate those arguments because, frankly, it was a little above my head.
But Tom Francis did some very good stuff about programming chess AI, which was quite funny to read on his blog.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, reading the things that he says he would change about it, I agree with all of those changes. Although I think my main problem with chess is it feels, because it's been played so much and to such a high level that so many of the moves are now sort of rote actions, that it feels a bit more like an act of reproduction rather than deep strategy at the level that I could ever play it anyway. You know, you're just at the level I played, it's just chaos. Obviously, I'm a complete noob. But if I were to try and get good at it, then I'd be learning essentially patterns, just reproducing patterns without any great understanding of the kind of overarching strategy that they lead to. So I don't find it a very satisfying game in that in that context, because I'm just not smart enough to contain the multitudes of information that it really requires.
Yes, although there's a flip side to that, because I'm exactly the same. But there's a flip side to that where if you don't care about getting better and you play someone who is just as shit as you are, then it's a really fun game. Like, it's a really great, like, sort of low-level strategy game. My partner is also shit at it. And, you know, when the few occasions when we've played, we've had a great time sort of double-crossing each other and catching each other out, because at its kind of basic level, it's a really fun kind of strategy game. The moment one of you starts to try harder and try to get better at the game, though, that system entirely falls to pieces. That I think so. You have to just both agree to not ever get better at it if you want to enjoy it.
I'm all down with that kind of pact. I think past pods I've advocated for the scrubland remaining as a scrub forever, refusing to learn. I think that's the best way in which you can keep competition alive, is just to not be too keen on winning.
Absolutely, especially if it's great life advice for losers as well. Just generally,
Exactly.
just like come down to my level. It's great here, I promise.
Yeah, that's the way I get through each day, Jim. But actually, I have to say, chess wasn't the game I've been playing. I've been playing the ancient Mesopotamian game of Uncharted, specifically Uncharted Lost Legacy. And I thought actually I was going to be playing, because Lost Legacy is was actually going to be DLC for Uncharted 4. Then it became a standalone. Then it got bundled, I think, with Uncharted 4, and now it's been released on PC in a remastered format as part of the Legacy of Thieves bundle. But I thought I was actually going to be playing all of the Uncharted games when I got the bundle. I didn't read the information terribly carefully. I thought it would include all of the Uncharted games on PC, and it might be interesting to find out why it doesn't. Like, there's obvious reasons probably why it doesn't, and that it would have taken more work to put out all of the first three Uncharted's on PC. But I wonder, I'd like to know the exact reasoning behind that, because I suspect they weren't willing to re-release the earlier three games without giving them some massive jazzy glow up, which presumably seemed prohibitive. But the thing is, I personally would have liked to have played the games again as they came out of the box originally, like low res textures and all. Just because I was really keen on the idea of playing all of them again in sequence to get some sort of final and complete view of the series.
I have to say that when you mentioned in the green room that you were that's what you've been playing, I made exactly the same assumption. I was like, "Oh, that's a collection of Uncharted 1, 2, and 3. Brilliant." But
yeah, it does seem. Yeah. Weird for them just to release the like the final installment and then some DLC, which probably you wouldn't really be able to interpret without having played Uncharted 2 at least. I don't know.
Yes.
Um, yeah. Anyway, that sort of just putting things out, making old games accessible doesn't seem to be what Naughty Dog does anymore. What with the remake of The Last of Us, and I suspect even more so than remaking The Last of Us, the earlier Uncharted games would require a much more complete reappraisal, just to meet modern expectations of gameplay. I mean, regardless of like the updating the graphics, which would be a far from trivial thing in itself. I think they would probably have to look again at most of the mechanics. Or I mean, that's my suspicion, and that was in fact one of the reasons that I wanted to play them all again, was to get that kind of perspective,
Well, you
which
feel
they have
like they'd be
denied
victim
me.
because, like, the first two particularly were so influential. Kind of creeping up behind Resi 4 in terms of how influential they were. I think that they sort of be victims of that because the formula has been taken away and refined and done to a higher fidelity elsewhere for over a decade now. So you can imagine them, feeling a bit adverse to just popping them out in their retro vibes. Although I agree, I'd love to play Uncharted 2 in particular, which again in the old school way.
Yeah, yeah, I have fond memories, especially of Uncharted 2. But I mean, I'd be playing them in the spirit of kindness. Naughty
Yeah,
Dog, if you're listening, I wouldn't be too judgmental.
you wouldn't be doing like a
Um,
YouTube video where you're going like, "What the hell?" Doing all that sort of.
yeah. But yes, anyway, Lost Legacy. Um, it was originally, as I said, intended to be DLC for Uncharted 4, which I think the team they were making it. I guess they were sort of they had spare capacity after as Uncharted 4 was kind of wrapping up, and as The Last of Us 2 was beginning to be made, and so they squeezed it into their schedules. But it ended up like feature creeping its way upwards of 10 hours, I think. And so they turned it into a standalone game. Although it doesn't spare like any time really on scene setting or establishing who the characters are, so it still feels like an expansion. Um, I don't know that players outside of Uncharted fans would come to it and immediately get really what the fuck was going on. Especially since it doesn't even follow Nathan Drake, who has name recognition, but instead follows characters Chloe Fraser and Nadine Ross, the former of whom is a roguish treasure hunter and sometime flame of Nathan Drake, and the latter is a brusque mercenary and sometimes enemy of Nathan Drake. And off they go together on a jaunt to annihilate UNESCO World Heritage sites in India, one massively overdesigned temple at a time, all while being pursued by a private military company with a megalomaniacal leader.
Well done.
Thanks. As they always are. There's always a megalomaniacal leader in these things. But I've been really, really enjoying it. Like it does feel in some ways a little bit sort of staid now in some of the puzzle design, but the structure of the game is in some ways a lot more exciting to me than the later Naughty Dog blockbusters, um, which sort of feel like Naughty Dog have sort of put aside some of the mechanical ambition to make way for like serious drama, albeit serious drama with zombies in it for some reason. And I don't know. I was just playing Lost Legacy. It made me kind of wonder if, wonder about an alternate reality, because here you've got these restrictions, presumably on the size and scope of the game that Naughty Dog imposed upon themselves, and by condensing it, they actually found ways in which that structure could become more open and more interesting, like in a similar way to the clever economic way that the Moon Crash DLC for Prey was made. So there's some amount of repetition there, and they found ways in making that repetition interesting. And here you've got like a lot of non-linear kind of exploration. And I kind of just fantasize about a future of Naughty Dog games that could have looked different if they had doubled down on that instead of just really high res people being sad whilst zombies attack them. Um, yeah, I yeah. So it starts out in quite a linear way. Like it has that matinee adventure feel, and you are sort of bouncing between cutscenes for the first part of the game, and then it just opens out into this fairly big hub set in the Western Ghats mountain range in India, which is inhabited, by the way, because I looked this up. But here, because it feels like this, land before time, sort of forgotten, beautiful, idyllic valleys and mountains and gigantic lakes in a kind of compressed and implausible geography. Well, I really wonder what people from India make of it. Like, I mean, I know I was bemused by Assassin's Creed Valhalla's just unrecognizably weird version of England, but I don't know. I wonder because there's such a context of the West's habit of over exoticizing other nations that maybe making out the Western Ghats to be this magical land of which is devoid mysteriously of people and just the remnants of ancient civilizations. I wonder if that's, I don't know, maybe a bit racist.
Well, it's a bit like that Eddie Izzard bit about American settlers landing there for the first time and being like, "We can be free to practice our religion here. There's nobody here. Excuse me, there's nobody here."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll come back to these sorts of issues in a bit. But in any case, in terms of the structure of the game, you can explore that environment in any order you choose. You tootle around on this extremely kind of fun and capable Jeep. And like in some ways, it's meaningless that you go back and forth across this environment. But there is this sort of clever ordering to the way it reveals additional points of interest and things to explore within it if you haven't found them already. And there's lots of really kind of neat gating mechanisms that sort of shape and control your exploration. So like muddy escarpments that you'll slither down if you try to go up them on foot mean that you're always sort of tethered in your awareness to where your vehicle is, and you never get too far away from your vehicle because the vehicle's tire treads can just scoot right up those slopes. And there's lots of stuff like that about how you flow around that environment and where your objectives are, and how smart it is about not boring you really and making you go back across too much landscape and giving you shortcuts and so forth. And whoever blocked out like the flow of that environment deserves a lot of applause, I think. But I think it does go a little bit underexploited, and they don't do as much with that as they could. But the other thing I really like about it is the two characters, Chloe and Nadine, who I already liked because I'm an Uncharted fan. But like they sort of begin with like fairly snitty hostility, but then it just really quickly develops into this just very nice kind of warm relationship based on mutual respect, and it's incredibly pleasurable to be in the center of that, and it's sort of executed with a sort of wit and lightness of touch that generally typifies Naughty Dog's writing efforts. And I don't know, there's just lots of little things in it I like. It's the way the script just shows off a sort of maturity and restraint in that there are like quips and callbacks, and the callbacks are good. They twist and they evolve the joke, but they never sort of outstay their welcome. And there's subtext when subtlety is needed, and there's just frank explication when efficiency is required. And there's a lot of neat, very inobtrusive ways in which the game, via its characters, delivers information to the player. Just like really simple stuff, like you'll be given the nod that there's an objective for you across a waterfall, but the characters will, in their dialogue, make it clear that they don't see a way across immediately, and it's just very good about giving you that information so you don't waste your time trying to reach things, but you know that it's going to become relevant later. And there's just a huge amount of attention to that kind of stuff. It's just really good at anticipating what the player is thinking all the time. And aside from that, a lot of the dialogue is just really lively. It's got this great vocal delivery from Claudia Black and Laura Bailey as Chloe and Nadine, respectively, which just feels just miles ahead of a lot of other games and voice acting.
Well, in Uncharted 2, which was the first Uncharted game I played, I think I mentioned this on a previous pod, but the level between you and Chloe, and I'm about to sound very, very old, and middle class, but I think that level when you first meet Chloe as Nathan is the first time I've ever found a character in a video game, and I'm going to say it, sexy. And it's nothing to do with the character model, really. It is the performance, it's the physicality she has with you, and it's the fact that the level is basically, you're sort of helping each other climb up walls and escaping from helicopters and stuff like that, and it has this incredibly tactile quality to it as you're giving each other knees up and hoisting each other up onto each shoulders, all undercut with this kind of flirtatious, femme fatale, I can't trust you, sexy, sexy talk. Um, and because your character has this kind of, Indiana Jonesy kind of aloof attitude, but she can get to him, it's the dynamic of that level as an introduction to her that makes her sexy, makes her attractive, makes her like a character that you sort of has exactly the correct effect on you, to the point where at the end of that game, spoiler alert, where Nathan goes off with the lady from the first game, which I hadn't played, I was kind of like, oh, well, why? Who's she? Like, Chloe's right there, Nathan. So yeah, I just wanted to inject that bit of unreconstructed horniness there, because I do think that is a bit of a work of genius, that level, in that it builds a relationship between two characters, and the chemistry crackles between them. And I don't think I'd ever seen that in a video game before that point.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to the sexiness in a second, but the that's definitely true of the relationship between Chloe and Nadine here as well. It just really it builds to a level of affection that you can't help but completely sympathize with. It's incredibly effective writing. And it's not just that their dialogue is good, it's that there are mechanical ways in which that relationship is underscored, which also help to alleviate things that might become boring. So one of the things you do as you're going around destroying these beautiful temples is that you use the winch on your Jeep to yank these ancient, beautifully carved doors off. And you do it a few times, and it's a satisfying interaction as you kind of tires spin in the dirt. But then later, it realizes that this isn't really a very interesting and deep set of interactions for you to have, and so Nadine just takes over from you. And she says, "It's all right. I've got this. I've got it this time." And it plays into this it's sort of like very short running but entertaining joke about how Chloe doesn't, wants to drive, and Nadine takes the opportunity at this one time to drive, and she's like, I can drive, and Chloe's like, yeah, backwards. But so here's a thorny subject, but as genuinely wonderful as it is to spend time with these two characters who are complex, they're brilliant in their own right. They're sort of very forthright, powerful women, both women of color. Both the actresses are white. Laura Bailey is actually from Mississippi, not as her character is from South Africa, though my ears are not well attuned enough to that accent to detect any flaws in it. So, and as while I think in a perfect world it absolutely shouldn't matter where an actor is from if they do a good enough job of acting and they are earnest in that. We don't live in that perfect world, and there is such a thing as sort of appropriation. And there's just something quite awkward about the game making these moves towards diversity of its characters, but not of its cast. And I know that they couldn't really have recast those characters in this installment, but I don't know. There's just something about, for example, IGDA nominating it for an award in their diversity category, which just feels a little weird. How do you feel about that? Do you feel that because it's a difficult thing, isn't it, to tell actors who are by their nature chameleonic to try and not be and stay in their lane, But is there a kind of a barrier when it comes to voice actors specifically
Yeah,
performing as other racial identities?
it's interesting because I just checked, the date of this game, and it came out in 2017, which was longer ago than I thought. And I do actually think that in that, rather brief time, even though it feels like that's been about 1,000 years since it was
Mhm.
2017, I do think we've got a lot better at
Yeah.
specifically this stuff. And by we, I mean, the media. I've been really pleased recently to see a lot of TV shows like really go for their diversity in the
Mm.
way that would have been, I think, probably would have been described as tokenistic or something like that in the past. The recent Sandman show, which just really went all out on like, you know, let's really make an effort to diversify this cast, and how natural it seemed, and how
And Rings of
completely,
Power as well. I mean, I
yeah,
don't absolutely love that show in a lot of ways,
yeah.
but I really did think its casting choices were pretty fantastic. And especially since it's given us the pleasure of seeing Lenny Henry on screens again, which I don't know, just fills me with nostalgia and joy. I wish he was in more things still.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get it feeling ick now. I wonder, how many people found it ick in 2017. I'm sure
Mm.
plenty of people of color did. I wonder how many white men did. I think we've got a bit better at recognizing some of that stuff, and I don't. They probably wouldn't have made it now, um,
Well,
in that way, perhaps.
so there's another aspect to this which makes it even more interesting slash uncomfortable, and that is that up until this game, Chloe's ethnicity was not specified. Uh, in earlier games, both like in the in-game models and the concept art and the design documentation, she is made out to be intentionally racially ambiguous. Um, to the extent that I 100% thought that she was Hispanic based on my encounters with her in previous games. And this game establishes her of being of Indian descent, and there are subtler changes to her appearance that make that more apparent. Um, and like, absolutely fine, go ahead, do that. It was a surprise to me that that she turns out to be Indian, though. So I sort of went back and I was like, I just completely wildly misremembered or mildly misread her ethnicity in previous games? Well, so I did a bit of digging, and needless to say, there's a lot of horrid discussion online about whether this is a woke retcon, and there are people decrying, creatively Neil Druckmann, or should I say Cuckman, as an SJW, and so on. And so, the fucking idiots are out on this issue. But then I looked at some of the quotes from the art and design books about Uncharted and Uncharted 2, which is when Chloe appears. And the quotes clearly establish that Chloe isn't white, but they don't present a really great argument either. So let me just read you this bit from page 22 of The Art of Uncharted. And we'll see how audibly your toes curl. So, Chloe Fraser is an exotic ex-girlfriend of Drake's. She's meant to be sort of dark and mysterious, so he wanted to be somewhat exotic looking, of mixed ethnicity. She's definitely the opposite of Elena, who's the girlfriend from the first game, who's more cute, perky, blonde, all-American girl type. As a contrast, we wanted Chloe to be dark and smouldering. Visually, she's a bit more dangerous.
Mm.
Elena seems very safe in contrast. And when you see Chloe, it's like, this looks like fun, but it could be bad. This could end badly. So, yeah, I mean, generously, you might say that Naughty Dog were intentionally playing on the closeted parochial racism of their player base. But, I mean, that quote quite clearly draws a line between white girls being safe and non-white girls of some unknown kind
Well,
being dangerous.
well, yeah. I
Uh,
mean, I think I think part of why that character worked for me in Uncharted 2 was that, like, when you're introduced to her, I could tell that her coding was um, exotic. God, they use the word exotic in that thing a lot. God, that's such a horrible word.
mm,
I could tell that that was the coding of the character, like the sort of character who is either going to try and murder James Bond or will be murdered by someone else to get at James Bond, right? Um, but I think the performance of Claudia Black kind of elevates it beyond that. I think
Yeah,
that's the get out that they have there, because she actually just brings so much more humanity to the role, and like the fact that Uncharted was like an early pioneer of using the actors in mocap rather than just sticking their voices in there, I
yeah.
think really helps.
And
So
her,
I can,
her Australian accent also, I think, helps it avoid being. It helps avoid some sort of level of ethnic specificity that could have been problematic. But I also think that's sort of a get out in a way. Like they let themselves off the hook by doing that. But also, I don't know, there's something about embracing the ambiguity of it, which is itself somehow sort of coy.
yeah, it's a little bit confused about the intention. The fact of the matter is that the character herself feels real and feels vivid to players, I think, in ways that
Mm,
lots of characters don't. Um, I think, yeah, you're on very shaky ground when you're sort of retconning yourself into a character's past. You have to be so careful with this stuff because people are rightly offended by using a bunch of racial tropes in order to kind of, sort of excite the imaginations of a kind of the morons they assume are going to play the game, right? It's just a
mm,
kind of really base way of doing things. But I think, the attitude should be one of kind of onwards and upwards with this stuff rather
yeah.
than like kind of embracing that murkiness to kind of say, oh, well, actually, she's from India, and that means we can make some points about India in this game, which I'm going
Well,
to
this is
assume is pretty insensitive, at least to some degree, and kind of saying, well, our character's Indian, so we can say what we want. And like, well,
well, yeah, that's the worry I have, is that it gives Chloe a license to detonate ancient Indian temples in a way that was more problematic for Nathan Drake. Like Uncharted, Tomb Raider, Indiana Jones, all, it is colonial plunder, and so I wonder if there's a degree to which they have superimposed an Indian identity to make that more of a get out of jail free card, which I don't know. None of this comes across in the text of the game. I have to say, this is just me sort of kind of gnawing on my fingernails about it afterwards, which is probably unhelpful.
well, I mean,
Can I just read you an extra bit from page 25
oh, please
of?
do. Does it
We
include the
tried
word
out.
exotic?
Oh, yes. We tried out a number of ethnic variations for Chloe, including Indonesian, European/French, African, and Indian. Sometimes a little exotic with a hint of danger. We wanted Drake to be attracted to her, but with a definite undercurrent of unpredictability. And I
For
don't
God's sake, that's so racist.
know. Like, no, don't do that. Don't tie a line between the race and the level of danger and unpredictability that a character poses.
Also, right,
Um,
like the Uncharted games are fun because they have a Saturday morning, kind of Indiana Jones sort of vibe to them, um, and not that that means that they shouldn't. Well, I was going to say not that I think they shouldn't confront these issues, because that's like my problem with Uncharted 3 is it was far too serious about itself, um, and uh, and I'd enjoyed the kind of throwaway nature of Uncharted 2, and in Uncharted 3 that seemed to be um, a little bit lacking.
mm,
So I just think I don't know, it's just tricky ground for them because they're kind of comedy games in a funny kind of way, and they're very good
mm.
at being comedy games. Um, so yeah, I just think absolutely have to have their wits about them with regards to that stuff.
But yeah, I suppose we are discussing games from a less enlightened past, and presumably we are seeing a direction of travel across these games, which is positive.
Not from
Um,
Square, not from Square Enix with their recent all that kind of bullshit about their the makeup of their characters in their game set in fantasy Europe, which
oh God.
I won't uh, re go over here, but it is that kind of weird thing where they're sort of the statement kind of goes, well, this is talking about the game they're making as if that is the most, as if they've like mined it out of the ground, like it's a piece of like creative ore that they can only refine down a certain amount, but it's always going to stay the same base metal. And it's like, no, you're making this game. You're continuing to make this game. Why don't you change the game, make it different? People would love you for it if you actually engage with this conversation rather than ignoring it. Anyway, I rant and I shouldn't, but we have got better to some respect. But that Final Fantasy 16 thing was infuriating to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, maybe we can say that Naughty Dog alone has learnt lessons across the gestation of its various games.
Yes, although with Naughty Dog, when they were like with The Last of Us 2, and they were like, me and the team watched video footage of people being shot and murdered and how crowds acted. Like, okay, guys, that's a lot. That's a lot to ask your employees to be doing.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I'd like to see them return to something less emotionally taxing, let's say, than The Last of Us and The Last of Us 2, which are grueling games.
If you read that Reset book by Jason Schreier, they talk about how Neil Druckmann, he made The Last of Us, which nearly killed him, and then he was asked to go straight into making Uncharted 4, a game he didn't want to make, that Amy Hennig was going to make, but then she left. And so he went straight from The Last of Us into Uncharted 4, and then straight from Uncharted 4 into The Last of Us 2, which just sounds...
Doesn't sound survivable, frankly.
No, it doesn't sound survivable at all. And I guess that's why he's now, semi out of the games industry and making the TV show, because...
What a beta cuck. Obviously, I don't mean that.
Soy boy Neil Druckmann.
God, I'd love to see Naughty Dog return to something a bit more kind of upbeat, vivacious, and importantly, mechanically experimental in the way that they could afford to be with Lost Legacy.
Grimdark Crash Bandicoot.
What have you been playing, Jamie?
I've been playing Somerville, which is the new game from Jumpship, just out on Xbox Game Pass in the last couple of days. This is the company co-founded by Dino Petty, who was the co-founder of Playdead and did Limbo and Inside. And it's a game, I think, which is drawing a fair bit from both of those games, particularly Inside, and also just cinematic platformers in general. Your Another Worlds and your what's that Darkness one with the lightning and Flashback and all those games. Yeah, I was really excited about this one. The game that the other Playdead dude is making is like a weird marble pushing game. It just looks really strange and completely unlike Inside entirely. So
is that the one with the beetle?
Yeah, it looks crazy. I mean, I'll definitely play it, but it looks completely mad. And I happen to think Inside is one of the best games ever made, and I'll talk about it a bit later because it compares to this game in various ways. So the basic premise of Somerville is you're a man with a family, and then a big alien invasion happens. This is the opening of the game. And after some shenanigans with lights outside your farmhouse and stuff going down, with aliens and monsters and stuff like that, you are basically set off into this world, which is a sort of quite soon after invasion, I think, America landscape. And in the sort of cinematic platformer ilk, you are essentially walking from one side of the screen to the other, solving puzzles and, sort of being subjected to various dangers that you have to kind of navigate your way around. Very simple controls. There is not a jump button in this one. It's just like an interact button, and then you have some abilities that you gain along the way, which kind of the game uses as its main sort of dynamic. I think it is. I've completed it now. I think it is. It kind of. I feel bad about this game because it is in its own way, as the kids say, so much. There is so much about it that I love. The design, the animations, the world, the kind of vibes, the hashtag vibes of the whole thing are really, really great. And there's just some beautiful work across the board, particularly with the kind of lighting of it. It's got this extraordinary
Mm.
colours, these purples and blues, um, and kind of colours like that that kind of streak across the sky. Um, and also, the character models do a lot with very little. Um, and a lot of the sort of more cinematic sequences are genuinely spectacular. You feel like you're playing through the Tom Cruise War of the Worlds movie, or something like that. And those elements I really, really enjoyed. Unfortunately, the game is very bad to control, very sluggish. I felt like I was wandering around in Kentucky Route Zero on more than one occasion. A game that is very good at speeding you up once you're getting a little bit frustrated with how slow you're moving. But in this game, oh man, you're just sort of loping in this kind of sluggish, defeated way from across these levels. And in a game where you're sort of trying to puzzle things out and pull levers and drop buckets and stuff like that to make things happen, like being able to quickly traverse backwards and forth across these environments is really important. So, like, having this guy literally slog his way through some translucent alien slime in order to, realize that that particular pixel that you were heading for isn't an interactable point is incredibly irritating and frustrating. I know there was an early puzzle with a bucket that for me was just a minor frustration compared to what came later. But was that the moment you rage quit, Marsh?
I don't know. I don't remember there being a bucket. There was a well.
A well, yes, the
I
well
didn't see a
puzzle.
bucket, and maybe that's the problem.
Yeah, there's a bucket down the well that you have to get. But like the story the game tells is it's not as original as I would have liked it to have been. I was really hoping for something a bit more like Inside. And it's hard to compare games to Inside because Inside is so good. But it's helpful to talk about it in regards to this game because there's so much it does right that Somerville does wrong. So, for example, in Inside, you're a little boy. At the beginning of the game, you drop down on one side of the screen, on the left-hand side, and you run to the right, and that is what you do for the rest of the game, right? Always running left to right in two dimensions, backwards and forwards. This game adds a third dimension, right? You're walking from right to left, pointedly, I think, for most of the game, but not all of the game. And also you're able to walk up and down, into the screen and out of the screen as well. It's disastrous because
Yeah.
in Inside that meant that they could put things in your path with real intention, and you would always know what things you were supposed to interact with and what things were background. This game does not have that, and so it is very unclear in lots of the puzzles um, what it is you're supposed to be doing and what you're supposed to be fiddling with. So that's sort of one strike about it. The other thing Inside does amazingly is that it is a series of levels, discrete environments, all of which pretty much introduce one mechanic for the duration of that level and then abandon it. As soon as you're about to get bored of that thing, it's gone and you're doing something else. And it generally doesn't return to those things unless it's going to do something that's a genuinely new spin on these things. This game gives you a couple of powers as the game goes through, which basically involve liquefying alien architecture and then hardening it again. And that is the game's one trick, and it is the trick that it pulls over and over again. Um, the other thing Inside does is that it has with those environments changing over time, is that you're never bored in the scenario you're in because the world is constantly changing. You feel like you're going on a journey. In this game, at a certain point relatively early on, you fall down into a kind of sewer or underground sort of structure, and that is where you spend the middle third of the game, which is sort of most of the game. So you're sort of
Huh.
underground with lots of lights that you need to fiddle with, and mine carts and crumbling rubble and stuff like that. And the
Really?
moment
Wow,
that'll
that
happen,
seems completely different from what I thought was the pitch for the game.
yeah, you go down into a sewery thing, and then you're just down there for fucking ages, and there's lots of puzzles with mine carts and stuff like that. They were just so tedious to kind of go through. The puzzles inside are pretty genius because what they do is they show you you see the puzzles and you think, oh, I know what I have to do. I have to jump up on that and knock that down, and then that will knock this thing down, and then I'll be sorted. And what Inside does beautifully is that you do that and it doesn't work, and that's the game's way. And then the game finds ways of telling you, like, yeah, I see what you did there. That was good, but what can you do to that again, which is going to make it work? Like, try that, but
Mm.
try harder, try it more
Yeah.
so. Which is just wonderful puzzle design because you feel encouraged, and you can make that tiny little logical leap that you need to make to move on. You're never going to spend more than a couple of minutes on a puzzle and Inside. Whereas this game, because of the mixture of the levels being in 3 dimensions, the visuals being more obscure because of that, and the sort of powers and the tool set you have at your ability being sort of more elaborate, you're just never quite sure what you're supposed to be doing. And there was this one moment in the game which I kind of almost made me quit the game and not see it through to the ending, which I'm glad I didn't do because the ending is pretty spectacular, I have to admit. But there was a bit where I got to right at the end of this underground section where I was like, oh, finally, I'm out of this fucking mine. Great, I've just got to do this, and then I can crawl up into that light, and then I'm done. And one way was blocked. I couldn't go that way. So I was like, okay, I'll go this other way. And this is sort of a minor puzzle spoiler, but I don't actually think it matters really. I have found myself on the other side, on the right-hand side of this location, in a room with some flashing lights that I needed to respond to with flashes of my own abilities, right? And I was like, oh, okay, there's like a flashing thing going on here, and I need to communicate with it in a kind of ending of Close Encounters of the Third kind of way. I
Mm.
spent fucking 45, sorry for swearing, I spent 45, 50 minutes, I think, in there. Flash, flash, flash. No, that doesn't work. Green means 4 flashes, reds, like trying to do this thing and failing and becoming increasingly like angry, and then going back out into the level and thinking, am I in the right place? Is there something I'm missing here? No, there's nothing else here. Going back in, doing some more flashing, and just like slowly going mad. And like, I've got kids. I've got the kids go to bed quite late. There's limited time to play games, right? And having my time wasted like that just makes me furious because I'm like, oh, I'm up for your game, but why are you making me stand in a dark room flashing lights like I'm in some diabolical psychology experiment by aliens? And then I looked on YouTube because it was too early after the game's release for there to be any guides. And I realised that on the left-hand side of the level, which I thought was blocked, was actually a ladder. There was a ladder there, and I just had to climb up that ladder. But I couldn't see the ladder because it was in the background of part of the level's
Uh,
architecture. And what I'd been doing was some side shit, some optional thing.
no.
Yeah,
Oh God.
so infuriating. It just feels like such a cardinal sin to not let you know. You're saying like with what Uncharted does, where it like tells you when it's time to do something. Well, it was a complete failure in this game uh, to have me standing in a room doing that, and me
I've got to
thinking
say
that's what
though,
it was.
like you were faced with the difficult problem of communicating with an alien species, and that stumped you. I was stumped by the puzzle of how to get out of field, which happened super early in the game. It just, I don't know, like I like you. There's so much to admire about this game. The vibes are oof, but man, it does not anticipate my needs or intentions as a player in the anywhere near the way that Uncharted does in its exemplary manner. I think like a past pod discussion, we were talking about the difference between janky and wonky. I was saying this game is both janky and wonky by my
Yes.
definition, which is to say there are problems with its execution, like just a low level bugginess, the stickiness of the collision, and so forth, which are not intentions of the design, I would say. That's jank, pals. But there are also problems with the way the design has been conceived at an intentional level. like the incredibly bad signposting. What irregular bespoke interaction are you meant to have to exit a room? I would say that is verified wonk. And the problem is that you get this Jankwonk feedback loop, uh, like
Yep.
Wagner's Jankwonk cycle, where you can't tell if a frustration you're facing is just a weird glitch that could be solved maybe by reloading, or a problem of the designer's intention simply being too obscure. And like sometimes it's fucking both. Like literally the very first interaction you have in this game, you momentarily get to control the child of the family, the toddler, who gets off the couch while his parents are sleeping beside him. Scary shit is happening. So, like, as a player, my assumption would be that I, a scared child, would attempt to wake my parents. And so obviously, I move closer to Dad, and a big A button prompt appears over him. But then pressing A doesn't actually do anything. It just makes your child character do this weird little hip thrust. Not quite sure what that was about. And then I was like, okay, well, clearly I still need to interact with the father because that's naturally A, what I want to do, and B, it's the very first interaction that has been immediately offered to me. So I spent ages like scooting around the couch, trying to interact with Dad from different sides, different angles. I couldn't do it. Eventually, I just got annoyed and started seeing if I could wander off into the background of the scene as a sort of like protest.
Are you
And
telling me?
to
Are
my
you telling me,
amazement,
Marsh, that you didn't realise that what you needed to do was do what all small children do eventually, and try and climb out of the kitchen window?
I mean, exactly.
That
You're
wasn't
meant
logical
to
to
walk
you.
off into the dark depths of this house being assaulted by aliens and go on a little adventure that doesn't feel at all like what I was naturally inspired to do. And then the weird thing is, I came back to the couch midway through and I found that I could finally make that interaction work. I assume it just glitched out before, but the interaction wasn't actually to wake my parents, but to hug the dog who wasn't even under the button prompt. And the dog just goes back to sleep. You don't even need to do it. There's literally nothing you can do by hugging the dog. So the very first thing the game offers you is A, broken, B, really misleading, and C, completely optional and irrelevant. Like, I love so much about the game's style and vibe. The story it's telling is interesting to me, but I felt there was just uh, like there was a one unknowable interaction in every scene that completely threw me for a loop. And
Mm.
like, just to go back to that field, which I spent so long in, I feel that you, the listeners, need to spend some time in it with me as well. I couldn't work out how to get out of this fucking field, which is just not an exciting problem to have. And you have this interaction at the field's perimeter that lights up a chain of lights leading into the distance of the horizon, where you see it visibly remove something you've been taught is an obstacle. Well, obviously, that's where you have to go, right? It's literally lit up a path to it. But you can't. You're not meant to. And in fact, what you have to do is go left and just sort of like chug along the fence line, which you can't even see because it's obscured by stuff in the foreground until you find the exact depth that you need to be at, where you can pop through the fence line, which appears to be impermeable, but at some point you can pop through it. Um, and I walked up and down that fence line multiple times just to make sure I wasn't going insane. And, just by luck, on like my fifth or sixth attempt, pop, I got through it. And like having exhausted, previously the follow the obvious chain of lights theory. And then, the well. I mean, I just didn't at that point. I just got to that. I was like, I immediately don't know what you want from me. I'm winching in either direction at the well. I can't actually tell what I'm doing because it's so small on the screen. I just like, nah, I don't think so. I'm going to give up at this point. And
I
I'm
mean,
glad I did because it means I
yeah.
didn't even get to the mines of misery. Maybe I'll
God damn
YouTube
it.
the rest.
Yeah, I mean the ending's worth a watch. Like the way you solve that puzzle, right, is you winch out you use the winch command, which involves holding and swiveling your control around in a way that the game doesn't tell you how to do. Right, you get the bucket out of the well. You take the bucket over to the blue goop. There's some little dweeby robots around there who will follow the blue goop over to where you are and vaporize the red stuff. Right, that's how you solve that puzzle. The thing is that the game gives you no feedback on that you're doing well. It has the robots follow the bucket a little way across, But it's not until you pull the bucket, because what I was doing is I was pulling the bucket halfway across, and then I was like, oh, those robots aren't following me, so I'm doing something wrong. I'll start again. No,
Mm.
what you're supposed to do is pull the bucket all the way across to where you want it to go, and then the robots do follow it over. But it seems like they're not going to. And yeah, it just seems like a complete failure, really. I would
Wow.
say that, this goes back to the very origin of the genre to, depending on which continent you're on, Out of This World or Another World, which is obviously a brilliant, like, foundational cinematic platformer. And I feel like the promise that a good cinematic platformer makes to you is to say, look, we're going to take away a bunch of stuff. We're going to take away a bunch of freedoms that you would like in a game. We're even going to rotoscope your main character so his movements are going to be kind of realistic but sort of limited in that game. And it's like, in return, we are going to remove both Wonk and Jank from this game and show you some crazy shit. You just have to kind of trust us on this one. And Inside, which again is a pretty flawless masterpiece, I think, and unfolds and concludes as just about the most incredible approximation of a nightmare I've ever encountered. That game has stayed with me and will stay with me forever. It's beautiful and brilliant and insane. Whereas this game, it keeps the wonk and the jank, and and in doing so breaks the contract that you have with a game of this kind, because it's not, none of this stuff is additive. It's just a barrier between you and what they have to show you. And so yeah, I sort of feel the same as you in that I really, really wanted to love this game. I really tried to love it. I played it past the point where I might have ordinarily given up. And it's just a shame that it seems like such an unforced error to make a game like this difficult to play. It should be easy to play. There
Mm.
should be one puzzle right at the end of the game that you have to try a couple of times, and that should be the amount of friction that's in this. And instead, it becomes a game about hunting for pixels, which is stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, if only it was better.
Yeah, so close, because these games, and I've been slagging them off mainly because of that fucking flashing light, but like, I really admire the desire to make a game like this, because I feel like it's a big ask. It's a big ask to get people to play these games, in a kind of in the world we live in today, and so I really admire the ambition. I just think they probably needed to spend another year on it.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder how long it would take to fix up a lot of the problems that it has. I mean, it does. I think it needs a lot of reappraisal in the way that it's designed at a conceptual level. Like just the challenges in front of you need to be articulated and honed. But I think you're dead right about saying that what you say about the contract of these sorts of games. They do take away a lot of the potential interactions that you might have, but the guarantee is that the interactions that remain are really interesting, and it's almost like puzzle design in that sense. You're taking away a bunch of uh, variables in order to make the interaction of those that remain really satisfying and intellectually exciting. And there's just too much looseness in this game for that to be the case, to the extent that it just gets bogged down in its own inobviousness. You have to be a mind reader to know what the architects of it intend you to do, because there's so much in there which is irrelevant as well to the things that it's asking of you.
Yeah, I mean, like, one last example from Inside, in the very first level of that game, there's a moment where you're chased by dogs, and if they get you, they will kill you horribly in those like brutally final animations in that game. And it might happen to you once, and then you realize what you need to do in that section is simply jump over one twig, because if you stumble over it, the dogs will get you. And once you've done that, you just need to keep running to the right, where you will jump off a ledge just as the dogs get to you. And it's exquisite design because it's asking you to do basically one thing, and the game choreographs itself around you to make it feel more significant than it is. And that requires kind of really pitch perfect designing. I remember reading an interview or a post mortem of that game, and they described what they thought made the game successful was their willingness, and this is, actually in retrospect quite a horrible thing for the people who worked on it, but just a willingness to trash huge swaths of the game if they felt like they weren't working at any stage of development. Which, I agree, it sounds like a nightmare. But that kind of honesty with regard to what one's game is and how it feels to play and whether or not it is the most impactful it can be, I do think that attitude shines through in Inside, and it definitely doesn't shine through this.
What are the other than Inside? Are there other cinematic platformers of recent years that you recommend?
Yeah, there's that one called Lone Far Sails. Is it
Oh
called?
yeah, that's great.
Which is a really lovely example of it. I think I haven't played the sequel, but I know Alex had good things to say about it on this very pod.
It's very enjoyable. Does feel like an almost exact rerun of the first game with slightly different verbs, which is interesting. Like even to the extent that there's almost an identical sort of beat for beat reproduction of your kind of escalation of ability in that game. You're commanding these. You're controlling from within as a single character these large contraptions. Is the theme of those games for those who haven't played them. The first one is a sort of sand boat, and the second one is a boat, um, which is kind of a weird decision to make, isn't it? Like in the first game, you had this really iconic thing of a boat on sand, and and in the sequel, you're just like, it's just a boat now. But that means it does get water physics involved, which is exciting. But yeah,
Yes. No, that one was good. And then there's Eternal Darkness, which I haven't actually played, but I know has its fans. Um, Flashback, which is getting a sequel. Flashback 2 was announced at an E3 this year, I think, made by the same team, which is kind of great. I mean, that's one of the sort of foundational ones. Beautifully animated, incredibly hard. I don't think I ever saw past the first area of that game, but like I'm excited for there to be a sequel. But again, it's one of those things where Inside is so good. It's almost got that kind of problem of Dark Souls, where no matter how hard anyone tries, it seems like no one's ever going to get it quite right. That kind of secret sauce, no one's ever going to quite nail it. Which is why I was so excited for Somerville, because I was hoping that they would have that. I mean, maybe the Marble game will have some of those vibes. Who knows?
is there I mean, without giving into about Inside, there are developments in that game which I would challenge anybody to predict. Is there anything similar in Somerville?
There is an attempt. There are attempts to do something similar. I'd say it's just not as successful. You could probably sit here with a bunch of people and come up with the ending after a little bit of brainstorming. It's nothing. It's not far fetched enough. Inside, the ending of that game, I mean, it rendered me completely speechless. It's unexpected to say the least. And this game, it's kind of, if you've seen some of the more like movies like Interstellar or Arrival or something like that, it's not too far removed from that kind of thing. It does make some bold choices about its characters. Like it's got the ending is worth it. It's still worth playing through. I think it will be even more worth it when there's guides out, so you can just obviate having to work your way out of these puzzles. Yeah. Like one other thing is like the aliens in this game. The animation on them is just some of the best I've ever seen in a video game. The way they move with such fluidity and ease through the environment uh, is just staggeringly good. There's one moment where one just stands near you and takes its helmet off, and you see its face, and it's just brilliant. It's just brilliant. It's one of those things where it just feels like a glimpse of another world. It's done so well.
All right.
So yeah.
Well, I'll be looking at that on YouTube later. Do you think I should persist then? Get over
Nah,
my hump and just
nah. Like watch the last 25 minutes of it on on YouTube. And that'll be fine, I'm sure.
brutal.
That flashing thing really annoyed me. I felt like a crow being asked to peck at a screen for a scientific experiment. It really bothered me. And also, the thing that you're flashing at, they've animated it very carefully to kind of roll its eyes at you when you get it wrong. It goes like, ugh. It like literally like rolls its eyes and shakes its head like, no, 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 it's like this. Made me feel like I was in primary school again.
I wonder what the solution to that puzzle is.
God knows.
What is it? I mean, did you look that up on YouTube to see what happens when you do the optional puzzle? Or
No, I'm done with that game, and I'm done with those flashings.
Well, that's all the time we had for this podcast. If you'd like to send us some questions, you can do so at questions@crateandcrowbar.com, or you can tweet us at crateandcrowbar. You can listen to all these recordings as videos on YouTube, where you can find other nonsense by us. The address for that is youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. Thanks as always to our backers on Patreon. You can back us too if you like at patreon.com/crateandcrowbar, or you can just join our lovely Discord community, the link for which is on our website, crateandcrowbar.com. That's it. I've been Marsh Davis.
Flash, 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 flash. Oh, sorry, I was having flashbacks. I've been Jamie Britton.
Thanks for listening, everybody.